Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today we are counting down my top 10 favourite films of 2024. So, let's get on with it. But first, some honourable mentions, as in films that are not exactly in my top 10, but they're still great films regardless. The honourable mentions are Emilia Perez, Twisters, Fall Guy, Beetlejuice, Transformers 1, Gladiator 2, and Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. And now, for top 10. For number 10 is not everyone's cup of tea, but this is a film even though I didn't get it the first time, but I think the more I think about the movie more and more, the more rewarding it got for me. And it's Yorgos Lanthimos' Kinds of Kindness. So, even though this is one more abstract of his filmography, he's definitely still on a really good running streak at the moment. Like, of course, there's The Lobster, of course, there's The Favourite, Killing of the Sacred Deer, and more recently, Poor Things. But he really did, although not necessarily his strongest film today, but definitely a film I definitely thoroughly enjoy, as it's essentially a dark comedy anthology film following three somewhat loosely connected stories about a man who discovers that free will is kind of a full-blown illusion, a man who's looking for his lost wife, and a wellness cult. Like, this movie is definitely one of the more bizarre and more of a weird territorial films that he's definitely done, which is saying a lot for someone who made Dogtooth. But regardless, this is kind of a movie that says, yes, this is the human race, it's disgusting, and we're all disturbed, and we may never change. Like, Godspeed to you, Yorgos Lanthimos, just never change. I just love Kinds of Kindness. The performances of Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe, Jesse Plemons is great. The writing is absolutely brilliant. Cinematography is also really good. And of course, the storylines, despite how really dark some of them got at the end. But again, this is definitely one of the more weird and more abstract films that you can watch all day. For number 9, even though it's another movie that definitely grew on me the more I thought about the movie, but this time it grew out my backside. It's Margot Forgot's The Substance. Even though I definitely did like a lot of the film's concept about aging gracefully or ungracefully into Hollywood, and what's it like being an LD woman, essentially in a more of a weird Hollywood politics that is America. And of course the black market drugs that like Ozempic and the weird obsession around them. Like, even though the movie is unforgivably dark and unforgivably brutal and gory for quite massive chunks of the movie, like, even though I wasn't too overly appraisal of this movie, The Substance, but however, I think I was kind of missing the point a little bit, as in this movie is essentially a revenge flick for all this, the patriarchy, or all the men that pretty much in Hollywood that's trying to put all the elderly ladies down and essentially end their career or water their achievements down, which is, again, essentially as a glorified, letter to basically anyone that's put anyone like Demi Moore down, who came back after a career in the mainstream limelight, has pretty much laid dormant for the better part of the 21st century. But however, she came back roaring, and of course now won a Golden Globe for her outstanding performance. And of course the makeup effects are incredible. The music just oozes with fear, and of course the third act is just one of the most wildest things you ever see in the big screen. Like, for number 9 is The Substance, just because of how much of a big impression it left on me. Like, you may find it traumatic, you may find it really messed up, but this is just one wild ride I will never forget for a long time. For number 8, we go from one pretty brutal movie to another really brutal movie, and number 8 is The Apprentice. The movie starring Sebastian Stan, Jeremy Strong, and Emilia Balaclava. Like, this movie is just haunting. It's just a really uncomfortable reminder of what America essentially ended up enabling at the end, but particularly as the movie did garner a lot of controversy, particularly not just of how politically charged the movie is, and of course the movie is about Donald Trump of all people, but of course, knowing the film was released before the election and Donald Trump is now elected as president, it's just essentially saying, like, well, look at what you've enabled. Like, this movie is just a very uncomfortable movie at best, of like, what essentially created one of the most consequential men of the 2010s and later the 2020s. Like, This is probably a pretty cruel and pretty brutal and somewhat of an unforgiving depiction of one of the most consequential presidents of all time, essentially now. And of course, the man who enabled them being Roy Cohn, being Jeremy Strong character. Like, this movie is not exactly for the faint of heart or anyone that's the most politically charged, but again, I imagine the Make America Great Again crowd is going to have a massive field of it day with this movie. Like, the performances around this movie is absolutely brilliant, and Sebastian Stan, under like coats of makeup to look like Donald Trump in this movie, is completely unrecognizable in this movie, and pretty much matches his vocabulary surprisingly well, and pretty much oozes like Donald Trump as the man and the myth and the legend himself. And of course, the cinematography and the film's aesthetics and color grading that makes it look like an old video recording or something that could have looked like came out of the 80s, which is something I do strongly appreciate out of it. That was for number 8, The Apprentice. For number 7, we go for someone from something unholy to something a lot more holy. It's Conclave. Like, the Edward Berger directed flick is amazing. Like, the Ray Fiennes performances is completely top notch in this movie, and the cinematography is it's very magical as well, and also the score gets very intense as well. And the movie, of course, famous for its unbelievable amount of twists. Not to the point it gets really repetitive or gets homogenous or anything like that, but yeah, each twist just stands on its own and just gets a lot more interesting, a lot more more in depth. Like, it's something that you could like analyze and just peel back the layers of the movie more and more and more. Regardless if you are Catholic or not, or even religious at all. Like, this movie is a lot to unpack. Like, the movie is just really intriguing. Like, how the inner workings of the Catholic Church work and the Vatican City works, particularly in the pivotal event being when the Pope dies, they're going to have to elect a new one. And only this time, everyone has a lot of unsolved drama, a lot of dirty laundry, and it's not being resolved anytime soon. And of course, the election of a new Pope has already just brought up more tension between everyone. And of course, politics is involved in this movie as well. So, again, regardless how you feel about the final twist of this movie, this is a very this is warranted for a lot of church conversations, particularly regards to if you're in the church or out of the church. Again, this is a really interesting movie that you should definitely check out, regardless if your folks are religious or not. And also for number 6, we have Furiosa. Like, this movie is amazing, and I don't use that word lightly, particularly after waiting for 9 years after Fury Road pretty much took the cinema world by storm and not letting it go, and claiming pretty much a lot of titles, not just being one of the best action films ever made, one of the best sequels ever made, but some even going as a little bit far as saying one of the best films ever made. Like, somewhat understandable. Like, this movie is completely brilliant. So, let's give a solo movie and a prequel to one of the standouts of the movie being Furiosa, being played this time by Anya Taylor-Joy. Like, this movie aesthetically is incredibly beautiful to look at. Cinematography and visual effects are amazing, and the costuming and production design is brilliant in this movie, and the acting of Chris Hemsworth and Anya Taylor-Joy, and of course the chemistry they have with their own respective groups and eventually with themselves is completely coherent. Again, this is an incredible movie to add to the lore of Mad Max, which is, although it has a really bizarre and somewhat stagnant release date, like it was big in the 80s, then laid somewhat dormant throughout the throughout 30 years, then of course the Land of Abundance came back again with the 2015 Furiosa, and it definitely came back to flesh itself out again with Furiosa. Like, this movie is just one of the most rewarding things you can see on the big screen. Like, this is just a eye candy, like, taken up to 11, like, in your face Marvel. Like, you're pretty much outdone by a somewhat of a punkish and a more Motorhead movie about, of course, apocalyptic Australia. Now we're in the top 5, and we got some real heavy hitters here, particularly with Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I am a massive fan, like I said, of Northman, and he's of course got loads of plays for like The Witch and The Lighthouse, and we'll just say he cemented himself in horror legend pretty much at this point now, particularly with Nosferatu. Like, this is definitely one of the most uncomfortable experiences you can have. Like, the slow, really creepy and gothic and very unsettling environment and atmosphere the movie sets pretty much grips you by the throat and never lets you go at all. Like, this is a really daunting film to go through, and definitely has a lot of nuance to its lore. And of course the performances, particularly of Alexander Skarsgård and Nicholas Hoult and of course Lily Rose Depp, they all give out like completely knock out the park performances in this movie. And the movie visually is just one of the most beautiful things you can probably see for a very, very long time. And particularly with the makeup effect of Nosferatu being portrayed by Alexander Skarsgård, who is just completely loses himself in this movie. Like, I could not tell that was him after until I just had to check the film's Wikipedia page. Like, there's commitment, and then there's whatever you put into Nosferatu. Like, not just from the makeup, but his performance and his vocal range, and how he pretty much conveys that, and how really uncomfortable he is, and how he sets the scene around him to the point he basically holds the scene hostage. Like, this is a movie that really understood source material, really understood what the audience wants out of an Nosferatu movie, and delivered it in plentifuls and truckloads and abundance. Like, this movie knew what everyone wanted out of it, and it gave it a lot more than, of course, a cherry on top of it. In a Sunday of one of the best praised gothic horror directors that emerged out of the 2010s. And for number 4 of understanding what the audience wanted, it's Inside Out 2. If we're talking about Robert Eggers pretty much going on a really massive hot streak, then Pixar thankfully ended their losing streak after being the one brand that's definitely struggled out of COVID and the really poor leadership of Bob Chapek. But however, Inside Out 2 is a major return to form for Pixar. And of course, Kelsey Mann's brilliant direction as well, and of course the brilliant screenplay that Pixar's are known for, as well as their gorgeous animation, and how the characters essentially evolved not just in this movie, but throughout the entirety of the Inside Out lore, from the start of the first film now to, well, how we got here at number 2, and how we started at number 2 and how we ended at number 2. It's not just character development, but also adding to the new world that Riley's into, and what's the new world, that's what's inside Riley's head. Like, the movie pretty much understood its assignment of making a really worthwhile sequel that definitely matches the original, or even some people say maybe even better than the original movie. Like the voice performances in this movie are incredible, particularly of course, there was a lot of brilliant performances, like Maya Hawke in this movie as Anxiety, like particularly in the third act, where she completely flips out and does all the controls and does them in an incredibly fast rate. Like, that animation is incredible. Like, you always guarantee that whatever Pixar do, regardless how mundane the storyline is, I don't know, like Canadian Red Panda, like, they're going to really push the boundaries of animation, or push it to places that's not really been done before, like showing a character essentially break down, not just from the outside, but literally from within, caused by some orange person that, we'll just say, it comes with a package of new emotions. Like, this movie is incredible. Particularly, it's about Riley in a summer camp full of ice hockey players. So, again, what could go wrong, but according to Riley, at the end of it, things do go wrong, but we just progress onwards. So, for number 4, it was Inside Out 2. For number 3, the studio had a very interesting year. After Kung Fu Panda 4 just came and went and no one really noticed or pretty much cared at this point, and Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate and Megamind Rules was so bad, it makes you wish that Megamind probably suffered the fate of what went down in these marvellous little novels. But regardless, number 3 was without one bright star for DreamWorks, and it was Wild Robot. Like, this is definitely one of the most gorgeous and one of the most beautiful animated films you probably see from a major studio. Like, I'm not kidding, like, I do see a lot of animated films, even though I don't review a lot of them some of the time, but again, when I do, I usually go for something that's really spellbinding with its animation and really thought-provoking in its story and its themes and its ideologies, and definitely and how the characters will going to have to progress from scene 1 to the end, and particularly what's it like to be a robot who's basically having now a duties of being a mother to essentially an abandoned geese. Again, the movie does explore a lot about motherhood and our reliance on AI, and the movie, particularly how it deals with these provocative themes, it definitely goes in its way that doesn't like confuse kids or alienate adults or anything like that. But this is definitely one of the most challenging and definitely one of the most introspective and retrospective movies you can probably see. Like, the movie definitely reflects on itself a lot, and it does get a little bit meta, particularly with its ideas of our reliance on technology and how we're going to progress on with technology or without technology. Like, the movie is definitely more of definitely one of the more philosophical films that DreamWorks did, which is again very surprising for a sentence for me to be uttered in this video. But this is definitely one of the more grown-up films that DreamWorks has ever done, and hopefully we do see more of that coming out in the near future. From already, we're now to our third animated masterpiece in a row. For number 2, it's Look Back. Even though this movie didn't get as much attention, let's say, Wild Robot or Inside Out, but this is definitely my favourite out of the three because this movie is just bizarrely relatable. Have you ever been to, like, if you want to look back to when you were in college or at school and you had like a really good idea, only this time you ran with it. Like, in this case, it was about two manga artists who pretty much bonded about the fact they really like similar things, and they both liked the fact they always want to be perfect and just want to be improving their crafts, of course, in writing and in art style. Like, this movie is basically about friendship at best. Like, this is just really bittersweet and almost bizarre, and again, really tragic as well, particularly with its gut punch of an ending. Like, this movie is not exactly afraid to hold back any bars or whatsoever. Like, again, the animation in this movie is absolutely top-notch. The characters are, we'll just say, are both relatable and somewhat textbook examples of what you could have been and what anyone could have been. Like, this is like relatable in the sense that anyone would have gone through it, regardless if they followed through their own past when they've looked back in their past. And this is just incredible movie. Like, regardless how bittersweet it is, or regardless how many people may have turned off or not, but this movie is absolutely spellbinding at best. Like, the more you think, basically the more you think about the movie and more how you relate it back to your own life, again, the more the movie will basically reward you. For number 2, it was Look Back. And the number 1 best film of 2024, it's Madam Web. Just kidding! Okay, for real. Number 1, the best film of the year, it's Dune Part 2 by Denis Villeneuve. Like, this movie is basically how to blow my mind and send any expectations I had and send them into orbit. Like, this movie it didn't just blew me away, it just really blew me away. Like, Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya give out top-notch performances, pretty much career best at this point. The movie, visually, when it comes to like set decoration, cinematography, and visual effects, are pretty much unrivaled, not just from this year, but pretty much the entire decade at this point, except, of course, its first Dune movie. Like, of course, the villain of this movie being one of Skarsgård's, and of course, Stellan Skarsgård, and of course, Dave Bautista is also in this movie, and of course, Austin Butler is a standout in this movie, and particularly in the sequences where he does knife choreography in this movie, and that's pretty top-notch for me already. The movie's cinematography and how it uses its mise-en-scène and how it uses its visual language and how things can be done without, again, a lot of dialogue in this movie, since Denis Villeneuve did say he wasn't too keen on dialogue and likes to let the movie speak through its imagery, which is, again, it's coming from a guy who understands what he says. Like, this is the guy who did Prisoners, this is the guy who did Sicario, this is the guy who did Blade Runner 2049. This is a guy who did Arrival. This is the man who's pretty much now a maestro at this point of his craft. Like, from one of the most nail-biting thrillers of the 2010s, now from one of the biggest sci-fi masters that the world has got to know already. Like, this movie, what do you say, it ticked every single box you wanted out of this movie. Like, it knew every flaw the first film had, and what do you say, not just improved on it, it just doubled down on the improvements as well. Like, the movie understood what people complained about it and gave them what they wanted, and gave them more, and more, and more, and more, and more. Pretty much gave them an entire buffet to the point they pretty much can enjoy it with a cherry on top of it as well. Like, this movie is just one of the most rewarding and one of the most brash and one of the best things you can probably see on the big screen, because this is big screen entertainment we're talking about now. Like, this is a person who knew the assignment and knew what he wanted out of people, and guess what? People rewarded him, and guess what? I did too. Like, the movie's like, I think, top 50 on Letterboxd, top 50 on IMDb, and now it's top of my list of the favourite films of 2024. So, what do you think of my favourite films of 2024? Let me know in the comments down below, subscribe to my channel, like this video, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads and Blue Sky. This is Elijah Wells, and bye!